Okay, can we start?
Yes, sir.
Any doubts from division of labor? The theory is so simple. Any doubts? Yeah, Nilu, tell me.
So when we write the answer of division of labor, shall we include the abnormal division of labor also, or if asked?
So you are asking, if the question is about division of labor, whether you need to write about abnormal division of labor or not, right? So if you remember, when we discussed about rules of studying social facts, I have made it very clear that Durkheim clearly make the distinction between normal and pathological social fact. Rules of distinction. That means for explaining any social fact, you have to follow the rules of distinction, right? Rules of distinction means you have to separate the normal and pathological situation. That means if a social fact is explained, it has to be explained with both normal and pathological situation. That means what? This both are part of the same theory only. So if the question is about division of labor, if you are not writing the pathological situation, it is incomplete. So you have to write that. So normal state should be there, pathological state should be there, cause should be there, function should be there. Okay, so all these are integrated. It has to be there in the theory. In fact, it is a part of the theory. It is not something separate. You cannot keep it aside from the theory. It is the part of the theory only. Okay? Arey yaar, please turn off your mic. Who's this 1 plus 5? Yeah, tell me, Gaurang.
There is a question regarding...
Louder.
Sir, the question in comparison to Weber, Max and King. There are only 2 points as per the discussion study. We got the 2 parts. One is alienation and automation, and second one is the society. That's more to society. This 2 will be, or any other points will be there, sir?
No, that is the main difference. The main difference is on one side, Marx is talking about division of labor leading to alienation. Durkheim is talking about division of labor as functional, which gives autonomy to individual. So this is the main difference. This is the main thread. From here you need to pick up and then make the comparison between their studies. How Durkheim is understanding division of labor and Marx is understanding division of labor and alienation. Explain that process and then it will be fine. So content is already there. So from where you need to pick the answer. Most of the students will face this problem when the question is asked about division of labor. Compare between Marx and Durkheim. You are studying this under Durkheim, so most of the people will write only about Durkheim. But you will get nothing here, because if you are not writing any comparison, you are not going to get any mark here. So from where the comparison comes, from where that thread you will get, the thread you will get from that particular point which I have discussed yesterday, that Marx is talking about division of labor as a reason for alienation, whereas Durkheim is talking exactly the opposite. Okay, and then you discuss all the other things that Marx and Durkheim is talking about. For example, what is the solution for Marx? Solution for Marx is communism, that is through revolution. What is solution for Durkheim? For Durkheim, the problem will be, temporary, that pathological form. And yesterday also I have discussed about Durkheimian version of socialism or communism, that some ethical code has to be there in the existing setup itself. So there is no need to change the mode of production. Within the existing framework, you can solve the problem. So all those things has to be explained. Okay?
Okay, sir. Thank you.
Yeah. Priya, you want to ask something?
Sir, I had the same doubt, the comparison.
Okay, so I hope you understood. It is basically the thread that you need to pick, and then you can make the comparison easily. Then there is no problem at all. The main problem is from where you start with, because you don't know exactly what this Marx is talking about, right? But it is from the theory of alienation. So we have discussed that in detail. When we discussed about alienation, I have discussed about alienation from process of production, right? Alienation from process of production, alienation from product, alienation from fellow workers, alienation from self. In that, alienation from process of production, this you need to take. What is that process of production? The process of production is basically based on division of labor. So here you will see alienation, and alienation from fellow workers is also due to division of labor only, because work is compartmentalized. So these two is what you need to pick and you need to explain. Okay, so that's it. Any other doubts? So can we start with new theory, suicide? Okay, very important theory, and this is an expected question this year. You can expect this year after the mains, you can see the question paper, and this question will be there for sure. Okay, so we will start with suicide. So what all things that we have discussed related to suicide before? I have told you his theory of suicide is a classical exhibition of use of statistical technique in sociology, right? And also I have told you use of quantitative techniques. Okay, so all these are related to science. Okay, so or positivism. So when we discussed about sociology as science, when we discussed about positivism, in all those areas, in all those topics, I have referred this theory of suicide. Durkheim was using, statistical techniques directly used in science, okay, or quantitative method, generally dealing with numbers to ensure objectivity. So not only in science topic, we have discussed this everywhere, in the topic of science, in the topic of positivism, in the topic of fact value, objectivity, okay, everywhere we have discussed this. And also I have told you Durkheim developed new methods, right? One of the method that we have discussed was multivariate analysis. Okay, so and we have discussed this when we discussed about variable also. So all these you will see in this theory. So multivariate analysis is what you can see in this theory. You can see statistical techniques or quantitative methods. Okay, so it's a classical exhibition of use of statistical technique in sociology. Now what we will do here in general, when we discuss about any theory of Durkheim, we will talk about the definition first, okay, and then we will see the cause. Okay, so we'll try to identify the cause, exactly same as what we have seen in case of division of labor also. But here in case of suicide, we are not talking about function, okay, and then we will talk about the pathological form, abnormal form. So we will first see the definition, very important part. Definition is very important because everything is connected to definition. How Durkheim understands suicide, or how Durkheim defines suicide, everything is basically depend on that only. Okay, then he will discuss about the reason for suicide. That is the second part. Pathological form, it is very simple. So when we go for the definition, he defined it very comprehensively. So first understand the definition. Any case of death, okay, any case of death which is caused directly or indirectly, by the positive or negative action of the victim himself. Okay, so any case of death directly or indirectly by the positive or negative action of the victim himself, which he know will produce the result. He know will produce the result. Result means he will die. So you are doing any action with the knowledge that you will die, okay, and that is actually considered as suicide. So directly means what? For example, you consuming poison, okay, so this is a direct action, or hanging. So these are direct action. Okay, so all these are considered as positive action also. You are taking an action. Okay, so indirectly I will explain now. Negative action also I will explain now. So as of now, just understand this is the definition. He understands any case of death which is caused directly or indirectly with the positive or negative action of the victim, which he know will produce the result. Okay, now when we talk about negative action means it is inaction or abstaining from an action. You may not do an action. That is what you mean by negative action. So inaction, that means you are not doing, or you are abstaining from an action. For example, you stand in front, there's a road, okay, so one truck is coming, or in the railway track the train is coming, so you stand here. You know if the truck or the train hit you, you will die. but you are expecting that the truck will stop here or brake here when the driver see you. Okay, so this is what you mean by negative action. It is an inaction or abstaining from an action. You know if it hit, you will die. So there is a knowledge, and you abstain from doing that particular action. That is, you are not moving from the middle of the road. Okay, so you will die in this context, and this death is also considered as suicide by Durkheim. Okay, so I hope you understood what you mean by direct action. Direct action means you intend to die and you consume poison, hanging, cut. All these are direct action. Indirect action means, for example, drunken driving. Okay, drunken driving. You know when you're drunk, when you are driving, you will go fast and you will make an accident and you will die. So the victim know that it will produce the result. So this is actually an indirect cause of indirectly committing suicide, because there is no intention to commit suicide. But Durkheim considered this also as suicide because you know that it will produce a result. Once you know that drunken driving is not good and you may die, still you are doing it, and if you are dying, it is considered as suicide. I hope this is clear. So directly means direct case of suicide. That is where you could talk about positive action. You are taking an action. These all are taking an action. Negative action means you are not taking an action. Okay, here taking an action you will die, that is positive action. Negative action means you are dying because you are not taking an action. Indirectly means you don't have intention to commit suicide. For example, there is a railway track. You are walking here with a headphone and playing the music. Okay, so you know if the train comes and hit, okay, there is a possibility that the train may come, but you ignore that. You are walking this direction and you are not aware that the train is coming, and even though it is an accident, but the fact that the victim know it will happen, so it is considered as suicide. Okay, so that's what I mean by any case of death directly. I hope you understood what is directly. Okay, directly committing suicide with the intention of committing suicide. Indirectly, there is a knowledge that you will die, but there is no intention to commit suicide. Positive action, you do an action. Negative action, you don't do an action. So, okay, and you with the knowledge you have. So now here, what is the problem? Problem is when Durkheim collect data from the police records. So Durkheim obviously collect data from the police records only, those cases which are recorded as suicides. So main problem here is in the data collection itself. Even though you are talking about you are using statistical technique, okay, and also quantitative methods, etc., the data collected itself is a problem. First of all, in the definition, if you see, most of the cases of suicide, okay, or most of the cases of accidents might have reported or considered as suicides by Durkheim. Okay, so real accident might have considered as suicide by Durkheim. Similarly, some of the cases of suicides, actual suicide, might not have reported in the police station, or it may not be in the records because of the stigma attached with suicide. It might have recorded as some heart attack or some other diseases. Okay, so the point here is the data that you have collected itself is not correct. So the analysis which is coming out of this data may not be correct. And you know, the people who do the post-mortem, they are known as coroners. Okay, so the people who do this autopsy. Okay, so coroners. And there is a study by Atkinson. When you read this Harlem Boss, you will come across this study. So Atkinson, what he says is, or there's actually a criticism of Durkheim. What he says is, it is the coroner's opinion. For example, if you see a dead body, you will see the ligature mark in the neck. Then you can assume that it is hanging and it is a suicide. Similarly, some symptoms will be there. Based on that symptoms, they will come at a conclusion that it is a suicide. So there also there can be problem. Okay, that what is the interpretation of coroners? Based on that only the suicides are reported. So the data he collected itself is colored by various personal biases. The actual rate of suicide might not have reported because of stigma. Then coroner's assumptions will be there. Okay, some accidents might be suicides, real suicides. Some suicides might have been reported as accidents. So all this cases will be there. So that is the main problem here. We will discuss these problems when we see the criticism. At this point of time, this is not required. Okay, so that's how the definition goes. So I repeat it again. Any case of death which is caused directly or indirectly with the positive or negative action of the victim himself, which he know will produce the result. So I hope you understood what you mean by positive action, what is negative action, what is directly and indirectly, etc. Okay, now what Durkheim trying to say is, if you see the rates of suicide, he collected data from the police records of different countries. Okay, so the rates of suicide, if you see country A and country B, if you take, it will be different obviously. Okay, but within country A, okay, or within society A, it is consistent. Here in this society also it is consistent. That means there are some social variables which are present in this country, and that is the reason why there is a consistent rate of suicide. Over a period of time also it is consistent. This year, next year, it is consistent. You can see consistent rate of suicide. Okay, here also you can see consistent rate of suicide. That means there are some social variables or there are some social properties which are different for different society, and that might be the reason why people committing suicide. And this theory is basically the attempt to identify that social properties or that social variables which is related to suicide. Okay, so Durkheim concluded that it is not psychological or it is not any other reason. If it is psychological, everybody who have mental problems or everybody who is suffering with problem would have committed suicide. So it is not psychological. Okay, so Durkheim ultimately tried to explain it as sociological. The problem is sociological, and there may be some social properties or social variables which may be the reason for people committing suicide, and he is trying to explain that in the causal explanation of suicide. So now we will have to see causal explanation. So as I have already told you, so he is employing statistical techniques, multivariate analysis. Multivariate analysis means comparing multiple variables, and he tried to take different social variables. Okay, and he compare by using different social variables. The various social variables that Durkheim took for the analysis are like male, female, okay, married, unmarried, rural, urban, okay, Christians and the Protestants, similarly developed and developing, etc. So different social variables have been taken by Durkheim to analyze the rate of suicide. Okay, and then based on this variable, he come up with some, based on single variable also he made some conclusion, based on multiple variable also he made some conclusion. So we will see some of the conclusions which he come up with based on single variables. So based on single variables, he understood that the bachelors commit more suicide than the married. That is one conclusion. Second, you need to write exactly the same only. Women commit suicide less than men. That means men commit more suicide. Okay, and one more, that is more in urban than in rural. So these are based on single variables. Okay, so here marriage is the variable, here female, male, here rural, urban. Then based on multiple variable also he come up with certain understanding that men, Christian, unmarried commit more suicide than women, Jew and married. Okay, so this is based on multiple variable. And he also concluded that the Protestant religion and developed have a higher rate of suicide than the Catholic religion and also less developed. Okay, so Protestant religion developed have higher rate of suicide than Catholic and less developed. So these are few conclusions which are based on multiple variables. Now, after making these conclusions, what he said or what he is trying to say is suicide is actually because of some social variables, and he is trying to identify the forces behind people committing suicide. So that is what he termed as suicidogenic forces. Suicidogenic forces. So these social variables exist in terms of some suicidogenic forces. So what are the suicidogenic forces? There are two suicidogenic forces, or there are two forces which are the reason why people committing suicide. First is forces of regulation, and then forces of integration. I repeat, so what Durkheim understood is there exist certain social variables in the form of some suicidogenic forces. So there is a suicidogenic force which exists in society, that are forces of regulation and forces of integration. These are the two suicidogenic forces why people committing suicide. Now if you take forces of regulation, again here based on forces of regulation, there can be high regulation and there can be low regulation. So if it is high regulation, okay, and if it is low regulation, he will give some name. Similarly, based on forces of integration, high integration and also low integration. So you can see four situations now. Two forces, regulation and integration. Based on regulation, you have two possibilities, that is high regulation and low regulation. Based on integration, further you can see two possibilities, that is high integration and low integration. So there are four different types of suicides are possible. High integration, this is what Durkheim terms as altruistic suicide. That means you are highly integrated with the society and your death is going to uphold some social purpose. Okay, so you are committing it for the society. For example, the soldiers dying in battlefield, the captain dying with sinking ship. So according to Durkheim, these are suicide. No, because the soldier know when he go for the battle, he know that he may die and still he is doing it, so it is suicide. But it is altruistic suicide because it is because of high integration. You are so much integrated with society, that's why you are committing this. Okay, so we may not consider this as suicide. It might not be suicide, but according to Durkheim and the definition which has been given by Durkheim, this is considered as suicide. And which category? High integration. That means altruistic suicide. Okay, so I hope you understood. This is the first case. This is the second case, low integration. You are totally alienated in the society. You are totally cut off from the society. There is no integration, nothing is there with the society or family or anyone. You live a very lonely life. So that is what? Egoistic suicide. Okay, so low integration, egoistic suicide. Now here third one, if you see, high regulation. You are very much regulated in the society. You don't have any choice. You cannot do anything. For example, the slaves commit suicide in the ancient and medieval time. In modern times, you cannot see this suicide. It is no more there because no regulation is there in the modern time. People are very free. Okay. Fourth one, low regulation. This is what Anomic suicide. So this is high regulation. This is fatalistic suicide. Fatalistic suicide, low regulation. Yesterday I have told you the state of normlessness. That's what Anomic. Normlessness means what? No regulation, no rules, no regulation. So the state of normlessness, state of elation, state of extremes. Okay, so Anomic suicide. So four different types of suicide based on two different forces. Forces of integration, forces of regulation. High integration, altruistic suicide. Low integration, egoistic suicide. Okay, and high regulation, the fatalistic suicide. Low regulation, Anomic suicide. So these are the four different types of suicide.
Forces of regulation,
Forces of regulation means forces of regulation. Forces of regulation, further two types. The regulation can be so high regulation, and then there is no regulation at all. See, for example, what do you mean by regulation? It is a control over the individual. For example, if you talk about in the traditional society, in ancient society, the slaves were controlled so much. They have no choice to do anything from their side. So high regulation. So the slaves commit suicide. That is an example of high regulation. That is what fatalistic suicide. Fatalistic suicide. It is because of high regulation. Low regulation means no norms, no values. Okay, so total state of normlessness. For example, you drunk and drive, no problem. Okay, you drunk, drive, hit someone. Okay, and you will also die. All these are because of low regulation. That is also considered as suicide. That is anomic suicide. Okay. So now one more thing. After this, what he says is these suicidogenic forces, it will not exist just like that. Okay, these are in the form of social currents. This word is very important. These are existing in the form of social currents. Social current means it is similar to electric current only. Electric current, if you go and touch, what will happen? You will die, right? Exactly in the same way, social currents also are creating some problems, right? You are connected to this current, then you will commit suicide. And these social currents are derived from certain social variables. What are the variables? The previous variables that we have discussed. So, because of different social variables, some social current will set up, and based on that, people will commit suicide. If you are part of that social current and it is imaginary only, you can't see or you can't find or you cannot tell what is the example of this. Okay, all these are social reason. For example, you fail in exam. Okay, it will create a social current because of certain social variables. Maybe your family, maybe your friends, peer groups. All these are the different social variables which are the reason for creating the social current. So you will commit suicide because of failure in exam, like that. So the social variables are creating some social current. Based on that, people commit suicide. Now understand one thing, that he is explaining social current is the reason for suicide. Social currents are coming from social variables. Now Ritzer identified two arguments here. Okay, so you can see here two societies, A and B. Okay, two societies A and B, the rates are different. Different rates of suicide in two society. Why? Because society A, for example, USA if you take, and society B if you take India. So what about social variables? Are they same or different? Different social variables are there. Okay, so different society, they have different social variables. Different social variables means they have different social currents. Because of different social currents, they have different suicide rates. Now, have you understood why different societies have different suicide rate? Because the social variables are different. Religion in India and religion in US, or family, marriage, all these conceptions are different. Now, again, if you take with respect to this country, India, okay, or society B if you take, what was the rate of suicide in 1950 and what was the suicide in 2020? There is a variation. There is a change. Why this change is there? Because over a period of time, within the society or within the collectivity, Durkheim always used this term collectivity. Collectivity means society only. Within the collectivity, there will be change in social variables, right? You can see 1950, what was the family in India, now family in India, or caste in India, now caste in India, or religion, etc. are totally different. So change in social variable lead to change in social current. So change in suicide rates. So what I'm saying is, in different societies, there are different social variables that lead to different social current. That is why different suicide rate. But within the society, over a period of time, okay, like 1950 to 2020 if you take, or 1900 to 2020 if you take, within the same society itself, there will be changes in social variables. So there will be change in social currents and there will be change in suicide rate. For example, earlier you can see if you fail in exam, a lot of people used to commit suicide. Okay, but that is not the case nowadays. So this is how this theory is actually explained. Now when you go for the pathological state, it is very simple only. Certain rate of suicide is normal in society, but if it goes beyond a limit, it becomes pathological. Why it is normal certain rate? Because it will actually help you in understanding the integration and regulation problems in society, and you can accordingly do something which is required. For example, if you talk about farmers committing suicide, certain rate of suicide is normal because you can understand the problems of farmers. If there is no such suicide, then there won't be any solution, nothing for the farmer. Over a period of time, what will happen? Suddenly, if everybody will be indebted and everybody is committing suicide, then that will create big problem. So certain rate of suicide is normal, and it is good, and it is better to understand the problems in the society according to Durkheim, because the corrective mechanisms will be there in time. If that is not there, suddenly if something happens, it will be a big problem. So that's about the theory of suicide. I'll repeat once more. I'm talking about any case of death which caused directly or indirectly, okay, with the positive or negative action of the victim himself, which he know it will produce the result. So that I've explained what is direct action, what is indirect action, what is positive and what is negative, etc. I have given you the examples also. Alright, then we have discussed about cause. For this, he collected the records from the police stations, whatever is reported and recorded as suicides. And there itself I have told you the problem with the factual data that he collected, and that can be the criticism that we can see later. And then he understood that the problem was social, it is not psychological, and he questioned if it is psychological, every case of mental illness, everybody should have committed suicide, and that's not actually happening. So the problem was essentially social, and he tried to identify that social properties or social variables which are the reason why people committing suicide. And he come up with an understanding based on single variables and based on multiple variables, and also we have seen that. And then he understood that there are some suicidogenic forces which are present in society in the form of forces of integration and forces of regulation. So forces of integration, there are two states, over integration and low integration. Over integration is altruistic suicide, low integration is egoistic suicide. Exactly in the same way, there are two states for regulation as well, and over regulation or low regulation. Over regulation, it is fatalistic suicide. Low regulation, it is anomic suicide. I've given you the examples like soldiers dying in the battlefield, captain dying with a sinking ship. Also I've talked about fatalistic suicide, like slaves committing suicide in the ancient and medieval time, but modern day it is rare. And finally what he said is, these social variables do not exist just like that. It won't directly affect the people committing suicide, but it will create social currents in society. And because of this only, people are committing suicide. So if you see Ritzer argument, different collectivity have different social variable. That means different social currents. That's why different suicide rates. That is one argument. Secondly, over a period of time, within the society, the social variable will change, delta social variable. Because of that, social current will change. Because of that, suicide rate will change. So what was the rate in India in 1900 and 2020 will be different. Why? Because of this. So why in India itself suicide rates are varying over a period of time? That you can explain with this. Why in India or society A and society B suicide rate are different? That you can explain with this. So I hope you understood these two arguments. If you understood this, then the theory is done. There is no need to read anything for this particular topic. This is it. Okay. So let me go through the PDF, and after that we can discuss it further if you have any doubt. After Durkheim wrote the Rules of Sociological Method 1895, he tackled the subject of suicide as an example of how a sociologist can study a subject that seems extremely personal with no social aspects. He intended to exhibit the use of scientific methodology in sociology. Okay, you can see here quantitative methods, etc. Through the study, Durkheim also classified the approach of a sociologist towards certain phenomena which are commonly understood as social problems or at times even antisocial. Now we'll see the definition of suicide. any case of death caused directly, okay, direct action, indirectly, directly means with an intention to commit suicide, indirectly no intention to commit suicide, but because of your carelessness etc you're dying, but you know that if because of that you will die. Okay, positive action, you are doing an action like you're consuming or hanging or anything. Negative action, abstaining from action, okay, of the victim himself, which he know will produce the result. Positive actions are the actions taken by individual which may result in death, whereas negative actions refer to inaction or abstaining from action which result in death. I hope you understood this. Durkheim understands suicide in a very comprehensive manner by also including those acts.
Excuse me, sir.
Tell me.
Sir, positive or negative action, could you please repeat this?
Positive action means you are doing an action. Okay, you are taking an action like hanging, okay, or consuming poison. You are doing an action here, right? So this is what positive action. Negative action means you are not doing anything. That is a problem. You are abstaining from doing anything. For example, you stand in the middle of the road. I've told you this example. A truck is coming. So you are expecting that the truck driver will stop. But he won't stop. You died. This is also considered as suicide because you know that you will die. But you are not doing any action here. You understood? That is what I mean by negative action. Abstaining from action.
Yes, sir. Right, sir.
Yeah. Durkheim understands suicide in a very comprehensive manner by also including those acts which are not having direct intention of suicide but indirectly cause death. That is death due to rash driving. I've told you this is an indirect case of death. Or you walking in the railway track by keeping the headphone and the music and you're not knowing that the train is coming. That is all are indirectly dying, right? For the purpose of development of theories, Durkheim collected data of suicides which are reported as suicide in police records. According to Durkheim, suicide is a social phenomena and he rejected earlier explanation of suicide which explain in terms of different factors like heredity, climate, race, mental illness, etc. With the help of data, he was able to show that all these claims are false and are unable to give a conclusive cause of suicide. In the case of psychological reason, Durkheim argues that not every case of mental illness or abnormality result in suicide. No theories are possible which can clearly define such psychological state. Moreover, Durkheim found that the rate of suicide in different countries are fairly consistent over a period of time. This led him to conclude that suicide may be a function of certain social properties which are different for different societies. Okay? Thus, a sociological cause may be possible. Now, the causal explanation of suicide. Durkheim analyzed the data collected from the police records of different countries, and by employing statistical techniques using multivariate analysis, Durkheim found a concomitant variation between different social variables associated with people committing suicide. That is, the rates of suicide vary with set of social variables and these rates are fairly consistent. Okay, so various social variables taken by Durkheim are marital status, rural urban background, rich poor background, male female, religious affiliations, etc. He finds certain general tendencies to associate a particular rate of suicide to a particular variable. Few of his conclusions include on the basis of single variable and also multiple variables. Single variables are this: bachelors commit more suicide than married, women commit suicide less than men, more in urban than in rural, etc. Multivariable, further, Durkheim also associates certain category of variable with the rate of suicide. Some categories of people who are men, Christian, unmarried have a high rate of suicide than women, Jews and married. Okay, so that is a category. Multiple variables have been taken here. Okay, he also concludes that certain countries based on Protestant religion and developed have a higher rate of suicide than countries based on Catholic religion and less developed. These conclusions led Durkheim to believe that the cause of suicide is located in society. After analyzing all the variables in terms of the control over individual, Durkheim defined two suicidogenic forces which are responsible for a particular rate of suicide. The two types of forces he identified are forces of integration and forces of regulation. Forces of integration, Durkheim concluded that beneath all the social variables there are two states, that is over integration and low integration. According to him, both these states may result in suicide and define two types of suicide on this basis. Altruistic suicide, what is that? Over integration. Egoistic suicide, low integration. Altruistic suicide is the suicide which results from over integration of an individual with society, in which a person thinks that his death will fulfill a social purpose. Here, individual embraces death to uphold the society. For example, soldiers dying in battlefield, captain dying with sinking ship, all these are examples that you can give. Egoistic suicide, this suicide results from low integration of an individual with the society. Individual feel isolated and alone. In this category, Durkheim keep all individual cases of suicide resulting from the acts of failure, indignation, desperation, etc. when the ties of an individual with the society are broken. For example, when you commit the exam failure, all these are coming under this category only. Forces of regulation. Regulation implies control over the individual by society. Okay? So this control is caused by the nature of moral order present in the society. This also results in two types of suicide on the basis of two different regulative status: over-regulation, under-regulation. Okay, Anomic suicide, low regulation, right? These are suicide resulting from state of normlessness, in which society's regulation disappears. Anomie is generally the result of sudden changes, creating situation of desperation or elations. Elations means extreme happiness, like that situation. Then fatalistic suicide, that means over-regulation. These are suicide which is the result of excessive control of individual by the society, that is a state of over-regulation. According to Durkheim, such suicides are rare in modern societies. For example, slave suicide in ancient and medieval period, but in modern time it is very rare. According to Durkheim, a particular case of suicide may be due to integration or regulation problem. These problems of integration or regulation do not exist as individual instances, but they create social currents in societies. These social currents are based on the nature of societies drawing from different social variables. So social currents are from different variables. This results in fairly consistent rates of suicide in a particular society. Thus, he aimed to explain not only a single case of suicide, but he also emphasized on explaining the rates of suicide. Ritzer identified two arguments in Durkheim's theory of suicide. Firstly, different collectivities have different collective consciousness, produces different social variables which produce different social currents. Okay, so you can see here different societies having different collective consciousness, that means different social variables, so different social currents, so different suicide rates. Okay, so different society, different collective consciousness, so different social variable, different social current, different suicide rates. Okay, changing collective consciousness over a period of time lead to change in social variables, so change in social currents and change in suicide rates. Finally, Durkheim also acknowledged the role of psychological factors which may create an impulse, but he maintains that the real cause is social. See, the main reason is social. Psychological state, if you may not be that strong, okay, you may commit suicide. The same problem might be there for every people also, okay, but ultimately if society is okay with anything, then there is no need why people committing suicide. It is mainly because of society, so it is social. So you can see here suicidogenic forces: force of integration, regulation, over integration, altruistic, low integration, egoistic, over regulation, fatalistic, low regulation, anomie. So distinction between normal and pathological state. According to Durkheim, certain rate of suicide exists in every society. These rates are fairly consistent and it is a fact which is true across time and space. Thus, finally he claims that suicide is a social fact which exists independent of individual will. right? Certain rate of suicide is normal as it highlights the state of integration and regulation in society. The act of suicide is always coupled with initiation of forces which correct the integration or regulation problems. If the rate of suicide crosses a certain limit, it becomes pathological or abnormal conditions. So that's it. That's about suicide. I hope you understood. Any doubts here? We can discuss now.
Sir, anomic suicide, could you please
Anomic suicide means, who's asking this? Yeah, Vinay, okay. Anomic suicide means what? What is anomy? Yesterday I have told you, anomy. There is a state of normlessness, right? There is no norms and values. You are not following any norms and values. So there is a situation where there is no control. No control means no regulation. Okay, so just go, drink, drive, all this, anything you can do. So in this context, you may die because of certain acts that is considered as anomic suicide. No regulation.
Okay, sir.
Yeah, tell me, Gaurav. Gaurav, tell me.
Hello, good evening, sir. Sir, one confusion is among the positive and negative classification. If I'm not eating, if someone is doing unsun kind of stuff, he is also doing an action. Like how we can say that it's not an action.
Which one? I didn't understood.
The classification in the definition itself, when he says the positive is doing some action and the negative is not doing some action. Not doing some action is also kind of an action, right? If I'm not eating anything, if someone is on unshun, it's also an action.
In a way that is also an action. Then how can you tell what is indirect action? So indirect action means those kind of actions. We generally consider it as inaction. You are not doing anything. Like that only you will say, no. In a way it is also an action. Not doing anything is also an action. But here you have to take it in that meaning. It has to be context specific. Yeah, tell me.
Okay, and one more thing, sir. When we are talking about egoistic reason of suicide, some people got enlightened when they are alone and when they are away from the society, and one is doing suicide. So isn't it kind of biased towards that if someone is alone or not having support from the society, he will suicide? Like only the social reason is not there. The more important stuff is the psychological reason. Like there are in the whole class there won't be anyone who have not been failed ever in his life, but
no, that is psychological is the impulse, okay, but mainly sociological. No, you feel alone, you are not at all integrated, you feel you are alienated. That is actually social. If there is no social reason, there is no need people committing suicide. Why you are ending your life if there is no social reason? You might be facing some problem in society, you might be facing some alienation in society, like that. So you feel like this is a life which is not worth living. That's why.
But at some point of time, everyone feels like that. Like everyone failed in their life.
But not every. That is what the last sentence we are talking about. The last sentence is, okay, there is a social reason, but psychological factors will create the impulse. So, for example, everybody may have some problems, but not everybody will do the suicide. So, psychological factor will be there that act as the impulse.
Okay, and also in case of his classification, like the study he has done, that in urban areas there are suicides are more. Obviously, if the more people are living in urban region, so more will be there. Men are doing more. Man population is more, so obviously there will be more suicides from that. So can we count this as a criticism?
We can write it as a criticism, but no, we have many more better criticism than this, so don't worry about criticisms, okay? In fact, this theory is full of criticism. We are coming to that later.
Okay.
Yeah.
Sir, with respect to
Tell me.
Sir, with respect to anomic suicide, sir, there is a line like out of desperation or relation, sir. Can you just put more light on how can be there suicide out of desperation or relation?
See, elation means like extreme happiness. You may be celebrating some success or anything, and you may not follow any law or anything. So just drink and celebrate just like that, and you drive the car at maybe 200-300 km per hour. So you know that you will die, right? And still you are doing it. So it is a suicide.
Okay.
So that is an anomic suicide because you are not following the laws. You know that you will die. Secondly, what is the rules? You should not drive beyond this limits, but you are doing it. And what is another rule? That you should not drink, right? So you are violating and you are driving. So that is why anomic.
Okay, sir. Out of desperation, sir.
Desperation also, like you want to get something but you are not getting it. In any way, any different case you can classify under that. And you try to get something and you may fail or you will die in that context. All these can come there. What about Sushant's suicide?
Yes, sir.
Which category it will come?
Sir, it's a desperation, sir. Out of desperation.
No. It is not desperation.
There is yet to be proven, I think.
It is related to?
I'm saying it's yet to be proven whether it will fall into the category of anomic suicide or any other.
No, I'm asking ego. Yeah, it is egoistic suicide. Yeah, what Anjali said is correct. It is egoistic suicide because he feel he's alienated, right, from the entire fraternity. So it is a egoistic suicide.
Sir, is the desperation due to lawlessness or normlessness or?
It can be due to desperation, means you are desperate for anything. For that, many reasons are there. In that context, if you want, you can see even Sushant case to some extent. Some people may say it is desperation. Okay, in that context, it is anomic, but mainly it is egoistic. Mainly, if you see, it is because of alienation, and that was the initial talks. No, when the suicide was there, initially it was all about that. So I'm not talking about any new developments, but it is related to egoistic suicide. And this question is for sure, this means.
So is euthanasia a type of suicide?
No. Euthanasia is entirely different context.
So and farmer suicide comes in which categories?
Farmer suicide, you tell me in which category it will come.
So I guess egoistic.
It will mostly comes in egoistic.
So but it depends on the farmer, right?
It also depends on farmer, but it mainly comes in egoistic.
But sir, in some cases they sacrifice their life for the greater change, no?
If you want to interpret in that way also, you can say, not a problem.
Okay.
Yeah.
So sometimes there is suicide by
Because
couples.
I've seen many answers. People are writing in the test series that this opinion is actually really good. Even I was not thinking about that in the beginning. Actually, farmers, even though they are knowing that in case of bumper production they are going to suffer a lot, but still they are doing it for the consumer or for the other common people, right? And in that way, and they are ending in indebtedness because of bumper production. They are not even getting whatever they have invested, and they are forced to commit suicide. So it's a kind of they are doing something for the society. Even after producing, still they are committing suicide. They have to commit suicide. So in that category also, I've seen some people are writing, and that is actually a very good perspective also.
Yes, sir, that's okay.
Yeah.
Sir, if you were to analyze suicide rates in modern Indian context, so we won't see a lot of anomic suicide because society these days, there's no normlessness as such, right?
No, there are huge normlessness. No, every day you will see a lot of anomic suicide. Means it's not that you're committing suicide. You see the definition of Durkheim. Even accident death is actually an anomic suicide. If you follow the rules and regulation, you won't die, right? So anomic suicides are there more. It is actually more now.
Right. And egoistic is always. When we discuss about egoistic is already obviously there.
Egoistic also is very much high because more individualistic society. Again, egoistic is so much high.